Snow still crusted the north slope of Crowned Elk Ridge, but in the muddy basin that passed for a frontier market spring had already started whispering of thaw and want. Axes, mules, cracked dynamite crates, even a rain-rotted upright piano waited on wagons, tagged with chalk prices that slid downward as drizzle thickened. It was a third wagon, half hidden behind a stack of warped cedar planks, that sparked the loudest whispers. Inside stood a thin figure in shackles, burlap sacks cinched tight over head and throat, wrists lashed to the rail with rope greased dark from other hands. A cheap lot, the auctioneer joked, good for those who need silent help. No one laughed. Men from the logging camps understood loneliness. But a bound stranger was another kind of burden. Bids for crosscut saws barked quick. Bids for a mule, missing one, I moved slower. When the shackled woman's turn came, rain spattered the auctioneer's ledger, smearing zeros. He opened at $10. Silence pressed back, as heavy as the clouds crouched above. 9-8, still nothing but throat clears and boot shuffles. At $5, a freighter coughed, then shook his head. 4, 3. The sack moved slightly, wind or tremor, no one knew. That was when Joel Carver, 43 winters, 15 of them spent high on cedar-lined spur with only saws and trees for conversation, stepped from beneath the eave of the boarding barn. He looked less bitter than part of the forest itself. Frame tall and spare, beard frosted white at chin, coat patched with bark-colored canvas. He raised $2 silver, weeks' wage for cordwood, and held them like nails waiting for hammer. The auctioneer's gavel smacked wet plank once. Sold for $2. A few sawyers grunted, unsure whether to envy or pity. Joel accepted the bill of sale without reading, cut the rope at the wagon rail, and led the woman away. She moved stiffly, feet bare, sack dripping. No fight, but caution pulsed in every slow step. They reached the sled, a low-runnered frame hitched to a draft mare with a lazy right ear. Joel laid a folded canvas tarp on the seat, gestured. The woman climbed up, keeping sack angled downward. Rain slanted harder, ticking the tarp like gravel on tin. Joel clucked to the mare. Runners hissed through red mud as they left the basin and climbed into the timber belt. The road to Joel's claim was no more than 2 ruts stitched between fir boles. Ice lay hidden beneath churned snow, once the sled slewed sideways, nearly pitching the woman off. He caught her elbow, rough glove on damp burlap, and steadied her. She did not speak, but breath escaped as if she had saved it too long. Above, wind threaded through treetops, hauling clouds until dusk fell earlier than the clock would allow. By the time they reached the clearing, 5 acres gnawed from cedar giants, darkness had thickened to ink. Joel swung from the runners, helped her down, guided her to cabin. 1 room, 1 loft, 1 iron stove still warm from dawn embers. He lifted the crossbar, pushed the door wider, letting lamplight spill across rough plain walls. Inside, sawdust sweetened the air, mixing with pine tar and last night's coffee. He gestured to a stool near the stove. She sat slow, rainwater puddling beneath sack hem. Joel, kneeling, unknotted the burlap at her throat. When the sack peeled free, lamplight revealed high cheekbones smudged with smoke, dark hair chopped blunt at collar, eyes wide and glassy like an animal that will bolt if gate opens too fast. A bruise, yellow-green, traced her left jaw. She lowered gaze to hearthstones. Joel did not speak either. Words felt too sharp for this fragile hush. Instead, he filled the kettle, set on the iron plate, stirred coals until they glowed fierce. He ladled leftover venison stew into a cedar bowl, slid across a plank table within her reach, then stepped aside to unsaddle the mare and carry in gear. When he returned, the bowl sat empty, spoon licked clean. Her shoulders had dropped half an inch, as if stew weighed more than rope. Candle glow trembled on her face, and for the first time he saw something other than fear. Uncertainty, yes, but threaded with a faint hope that did not ask to be named. He pointed to a dry wool blanket, then to the cot tucked under loft ladder. She looked at blanket, then at him, hesitant. He shook his head. He'd take the floor. He unrolled his bedroll beside hearth, back turned to give her privacy, and busied himself scraping ice from boots. Behind him, floorboard side. She crossed, blanket trailing, and curled on the cot. Joel banked the fire, set kettle to one side, then lay down still in coat, hat covering eyes. For long minutes only wind spoke, prowling chinks in the log walls. Then a sound, cloth rustle, soft footfall. Joel lifted brim. She stood by the hearth, holding out the empty cedar bowl, asking silently for wash water, so she could clean it herself. He took bowl, refilled kettle, and handed her a rag. She scrubbed, dried, replaced bowl on shelf exactly where she'd taken it. When done, she dipped her head, thank you motion without voice, and returned to cot. Joel lay awake, listening to storm fade into sleet rattle, sleet into drip hush. Somewhere toward morning he drifted into a dream of falling timber that sprouted leaves mid-fall, branches twisting into shapes of letters he could not read. Sunrise arrived behind a quilt of fog. Joel stoked stove, its heat chasing damp. He brewed coffee so thick it shivered like tar, poured 2 tin cups. She accepted, cradled warmth, sipped, flinched at bitterness but kept sipping. He sliced bread, set a slab of salt pork to fry. Steam rose, curling hair wisps at her jaw. She watched the fire as though mapping its language. After breakfast, he fetched a small hand axe, offered a half first. She frowned, puzzled. He pointed at kindling box, supply low. Her shoulders squared. She followed him outside, boots crunching frost. He split cedar, showing safe stance. She mirrored, muscles tense but willing. Thunk. First log parted. A flicker of satisfaction. Second log split cleaner. By fifth, rhythm steadied. Lift, breathe, drop, crack. Joel stacked slivers, feeling cabin's quiet widen to include 2 sets of tracks. They spent morning thus. He dragged felled pine to buck into stove lengths. She ferried kindling, piled chips. Noon sun broke the fog. Snowmelt dripped from branch tips like clock ticks. At break, he poured fresh coffee, thinned with creek water. She added a pinch of crushed spruce needle. Stirring. Old trick for bitterness he'd forgotten. Sip. The brew softened, tasting of green hiding under snow. Shadows lengthened. Joel trimmed ragged bark from a plank, preparing to carve pegs for new roof lath. She approached, motioning with hand. Could she help? He guided her grip on the draw knife, knuckles brushing. A spark, warm yet startling, flickered through them both. She drew blade, shaving curls of cedar. The scent, bright and resinous, filled cabin until winter seemed farther than calendar claimed. As dusk pulled violet, she stood by the door, hesitation quivering. Then her lips parted. Air shaped nearly a syllable, lost a sudden gust rattling shutters. Color drained from her cheeks. She shook head, retreating to stove. Joel did not press. He set another log on fire, its flame reflecting in her eyes. Night, again. He sketched a line beneath the charcoal sentence on mantel. $2 owed to silence. Under it, he added a second line, slower. Silence pays back in cedar sparks. He set stick aside, wondering if she would read. She did. Her gaze lingered, then lifted to meet his. She nodded, thin but real. Outside, moon climbed clear, silvering stump tops. Inside, the gap between 2 bedrolls felt smaller, no longer chasm but narrow creek a single plank could bridge, when time and trust allowed. Frost retreated, inch by stubborn inch, leaving the clearing soaked and shining. Each dawn Joel Carver woke to a cabin that no longer echoed back at him alone. The woman, still wordless, rose with the stovepipe's first sigh and claimed small tasks before he could reach them. Stoking coals, wiping window frost let the pale sun search inside, setting 2 tin cups where one had always waited unread. They settled into labor shaped by mountains. He felled white fir. She freed trunk of limbs, dragging branches to the sawbuck. When bark tore glove and split his thumb, she rinsed sap away with creek water cooled by snowmelt, packed cut with spruce gum, and wrapped it in a strip torn from the burlap sack that once covered her face. The cloth knotted against the wound, like a seal closing on the past. Evening stretched brighter now. Sunset flared on ridged snow, bathing inside logs in apricot glow. Joel carved roof pegs near the hearth. She sorted river stones, laying them in rising walls around a spring lettuce bed. Tiny green shoots emerged under her palm as if listening for permission. One afternoon, a raven dropped on the stump, black eyes shining with borrowed secrets. She scattered sawdust toward it. Joel chuckled. A low, cracked rumble startled them both, then handed her a crust of cornbread to crumble. Raven pecked, cough flew. Something lighter than laughter hovered after its wings. The thaw widened creeks to torrents. Joel rode the mare downslope, sled empty, to barter for flour and lamp oil. He left her by the gate with 3 words pressed into palm, back by dusk, and trust heavier than the axe he set beside the door. In the market basin murmurs crawled. Rumors of bounty hunters searching for a missing debtor's daughter, last seen sold northward with a sack to hide her face. Joel paid coin, kept silence. On the ride home, sky bruised iron. A wet wind clung. He found fresh hoofprints cut across his trail. 3 horses shod narrow, rider kind that carry irons and quick questions. He reached the cabin at dusk's last flame. She waited at fence rail, axe half white in fist, eyes scanning timber. No riders, but tracks circle beyond tree lean, studying smoke curl. Together they pulled sled into shed, closed shutters, checked rifle sights without speaking. Night bruised glass, yet cabin heartbeat stayed steady beneath the hum of wind-driven snow. Joel paced floor until embers dulled. She sat near door, knife across lap. At some hour when only owls listen, she whispered a single sound, soon. Her first shaped syllable. He answered with nod slow as sap. Promise or warning. She read enough to settle. Days tightened again, work more guarded. He fashioned a new bolt for the door, peg log braces beneath rafters. She packed venison jerky into cloth rolls, cached them under loose hearthstones. Ravens climbed thermal columns overhead, carrying news no man deciphered. One twilight distant rifle shots cracked, dull from valley floor, then silenced. Joel stacked kindling near every corner. If cabin burned, they would not freeze before sunrise. She stood by window slit, braid trembling against spine. Snow began large, quiet flakes muffling world under cold wool. At midnight, hoofbeats approached, careful, cadence of men counting steps. Joel through open shutter, darkness answered. A voice called soft, mocking, "Trade for runaway?" She stiffened. Joel lifted rifle, but a sill, sighting only echo. He fired once into night sky. Hooves scattered through drifts, curses fading. Silence poured back thicker than snow. Inside, smoke from spent cartridge curled like question. She pressed palm over rifle barrel still warm, then over her own heart, a vow traded skin for steel. He touched her wrist gently, turning hand, setting it atop his heartbeat in return. 2 pulses thudded through calluses, deciding together that roof and name would both be defended. Storm pinned the riders past ridge. Days passed without return. Winter's tail snapped hard, then limped away. March sun burst rivers free, and with melt came bare tracks nosing around the pig shed. They set snares and strung tins on twine as alarms. Survival shifted from men to beast, but vigilance learned one shape fits all threats. By a creek, pussy willows fuzz silver. She knelt, watching water eat last ice, and at length formed another word, voice rough from long disuse. Home. Joel, sharpening saw blade, stopped mid-draw. He met her gaze. Into that single word she poured a plea, a claim, and an unfinished map. He answered the only way he trusted. Carved a cedar peg, handed it across. She planted it beside the lettuce bed, pressing earth firm. First stake of something neither auction nor fear could uproot. That evening she opened his cedar chest, found neatly folded lengths of old ribbon. Keepsakes his mother had sent before letters stopped. She chose the palest blue, tied it at braid's end, then stood before him. He touched ribbon, then lifted charcoal stick to mantle once more. Under his earlier lines, he wrote blue ties to silences into speech. She read, laid fingers over the words, left sooty prints like signatures. Late April delivered a thaw flood roaring louder than axes ever could. Log jam burst upriver, sending cedar trunks whipping past clearing. With them came a body, one bounty rider. Coat snag on a half-submerged branch, wrists burned by rope friction. Joel waded knee-deep, hauled corpse ashore. Saddlebag held a poster. Her likeness sketched rigid. Reward $30 for property debt. She stood over the paper, braid ribbon floating in wind. Her shoulders squared, and at last she spoke full breath. Evelyn, I pay no debt but living. Joel burned the poster on the thaw-wet stones. He nodded once, thick with things beyond words, then reached for her hand. Rough Hugh meets one shackled. Their fingers locked, more pledge than comfort. Ember smell rose as ashes spiraled upward, mixing with birch smoke drifting from their chimney. The flood receded. Dead rider drifted downstream, reward unclaimed. Ravens followed the current, calling witness. Inside the cabin, the sack that used a blinder now served as rag for lamp oil. Rope became clothesline for sprouting herb pots. And on the mantel, 3 lines of charcoal waited for 2 more parts of a story already choosing its ending. Late spring light draped the ridge in thin gold, and the valley breathed a slow green thaw. Spruce tips pushed candles of lime. Creeks lost the last glassy scabs of ice, and the clearing around Joel Carver's cabin filled with the smell of wet cedar, churned soil, living possibility. Evelyn, her name finally spoken, moved in that space as though measuring how wide freedom could stretch without breaking. They broke new ground with a rhythm no metronome could follow, yet always found the same downbeat. Joel swung the mattock, lifting plates of sod. Evelyn followed, slicing roots with the steel knife he had gifted her, and crumbling loam between calloused fingers. They sowed beans, late barley, and a dozen apple seeds from a peddler Joel had once bartered for lantern oil. Over each furrow Evelyn whispered a breath of half-remembered him. She could not yet sing aloud, but seeds seemed to lean toward the hush on her lips. At noon she deemed the earth hungry and boiled spruce-tip tea to feed its thirst. Joel, amused, tasted the brew, sharp, bright, like green lightning, and agreed the ground might grow bold under such encouragement. Night found them side by side at the chopping block, splitting remaining winter rounds to let summer sun bleach them bone dry. Sparks burst from iron, glinted in Evelyn's ribbon braid. Joel marked the way the ribbon fluttered whenever she swung the axe and carved a small cedar token shaped like that motion, a flutter with grain forever mid-flight. He placed it on the mantel beside the charcoal lines, a silent confession that her presence had etched itself into cabin timber. June's first thunderclouds rolled, and with them rode rumor. A male peddler, bristling with letters and frontier talk, paused for water. Between gulps he spoke of a man named Calder Gallows Finch, a bounty captain, scar on his throat like a stitched bootlace, who'd sworn to make an example of the debtor's daughter. Finch had lost one rider to the flood. He wanted repayment in blood. He and 2 guns were combing every logging camp north of the rail spur. Joel's jaw set like a frozen creek. Evelyn listened, thumb grazing knife hilt. Neither asked the peddler to stay. Both watched him vanish down the slope, his pack creaking with other people's stories. That night Joel slid rifle cartridges across the table, counting. Evelyn sharpened her blade until shavings of steel dusted the plank like gray frost. But when tools were ready, they did not speak of ambush or flight. Instead, they shared coffee blacker than riverbed, and Joel added a 4th line to the mantel ledger. If fear knocks, let love answer the door with both hands steady. The storm broke 3 days later. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled against Crow's Eye Peak, and wind screamed along the stovepipe until sparks danced on hearthstone. In the roar of midnight, hoofbeats plowed into mud outside. A harsh voice barked a name neither occupant answered. Evelyn Finch. Joel stepped from cot to door, rifle leveled. Evelyn followed, knife in palm. Lightning shredded the dark long enough to paint 3 figures. Calder Finch astride a mud-flecked sorrel, scar gleaming. 2 rifles flanking. The porch rafters groaned as wind tried to rip them free. Hand the debtor's whelp out, Finch yelled, and I'll leave you your house. Joel's answer was the click of a rifle bolt. Thunder swallowed the sound, but Finch heard. He spat and signaled. One henchman dismounted, torch in hand, stalking toward the woodpile. Evelyn slipped past Joel, ghost in rain, and melted behind rain-slick logs. The torch-bearer never saw her move. A flash of ribbon braid, a fist around his wrist, a knife hilt tapped behind his ear. He slumped into mud, torch dying with a hiss. The second gun raised his rifle. Joel fired first, Bullet shattering the man's revolver arm. Not life. Screaming, he dropped into runoff water. Finch wheeled horse, throat scar twitching. Lightning bared his teeth. I'll burn every cedar above this creek. He spurred forward, pistol rising. Joel stepped off porch into rain, muzzle steady on Finch's chest. But before trigger met will, Evelyn emerged, torch in hand, flame reborn. She held it high enough that smoke coiled around Finch's face, smoke born of his own threat. Rain steamed off the cloth, fire hissing but alive. "Name," she said, her voice rough yet ringing. "Say my name." Finch sneered, raindrops carving paths through soot on cheeks. Yet when he tried to speak, silence. The wind stole his breath, or guilt sealed his tongue. Only storm answered. Evelyn lowered torch, slammed it into slush, extinguishing heat. "You do not own it," she told him. Her second sentence since the clearing thawed. Joel kept rifle trained until Finch yanked reins, horse rearing, and galloped downslope dragging wounded partner. The unconscious torchbearer Joel lifted onto sled, lashed with rope, sent sliding toward valley with a slap that started mareless motion. Storm would deliver him to his captain's path. In the echoing dark, Joel laid rifle on porch rail. Evelyn stood beside him, breath visible, ribbon plastered to neck. Between lightning flickers, their eyes found each other. Confirmation that the worst had tested them and left. Morning revealed scorched footprints, muddy sled grooves, and broken twigs where Finch's horse had clipped trees in retreat. Joel buried the spent cartridge near the lettuce bed, pressing soil like a seal. Evelyn collected the fallen torch, stripped charcloth, wove the salvage threads into her braid beneath the blue ribbon. A stripe of ash to remember why fire now answered to her, not against her. They loaded supplies, rode mule path to the lone circuit preacher's chapel. Half a day through dripping ferns. The preacher read worry in their eyes and offered blessing without fee. Under cedar rafters Joel spoke her name, Evelyn Northwood, anchoring it to his own with words few, but solid. She answered, voice hoarse yet unbroken, "Joel Carver, I am willing." He placed on her finger a ring hammered from a steel token he had carved, cedar curl shape flattened to circle, edges soft from file's patient stroke. She slid her burlap ribbon, washed clean, around his wrist's band. Preacher whispered amen. The forest outside echoed with distant axe knocks like applause. Summer surged. Beans climbed strings to roofline, lettuce bed shimmered bright. Finch never returned. Rumor claimed he drowned crossing flood-swollen Boar's Tail Creek. Ravens carried gossip. Joel and Evelyn did not follow. They built a second room. Half walls first, then roofing shakes, then window frame scavenged from an abandoned ranger station. Every board they nailed together fused silence into shared sound. Cedar grain sang under mallet. Sawdust dusted shoulders. Laughter came wary, then quick. On the mantel 5 charcoal lines, now read like a poem. $2 owed to silence. Silence pays back in cedar sparks. Blue ties 2 silences into speech. If fear knocks, love answers steady. Name spoken, fire tamed. Below, Evelyn added a 6th in smaller script. Roots share water when storms run out. Joel traced the words, then drew a final empty line. Space enough for seasons yet uncounted. The first apples blushed in September sun. Joel carved ladder rungs. Evelyn climbed to pluck fruit, handing each down like promise. The burlap sack that once stole her face now lined a basket brimmed with red-striped harvest. Wind threaded through cedar crown, humming a low hymn neither had known, but both now understood. And in the cabin, larger, warmer, etched with new grain. 2 mugs hung on one peg, 2 coats brushed shoulders, and 2 voices, still quiet, practiced the unfinished art saying all that work in winter had taught them about remaining. Early autumn pulled a copper veil over the ridge, tinting every cedar needle and fern tip in warm light that lasted only moments before evenings cooled again. Joel and Evelyn slipped easily into the tempo of shortening days. They woke to wood smoke breath, shared coffee sweetened by a spoon of honey she had bartered from a trapper, then walked the land side by side to tally what summer left behind. The beans she had coaxed now rattled dry, so they strung them on twine above the stove, violet pods turning brittle in gentle heat. Barley, cut and bundled, leaned in golden teepees along the fence. At dusk, they threshed it with pine sticks, grain leaping free to land in an old blanket Evelyn had stitched from flour sacks. Joel wove baskets from willow for apples and hung them beneath the eaves where cool air would keep fruit crisp. They spoke few words, yet exchanged constant signals, one glance asking, one nod answering, until each job meshed with the next like teeth in a saw. One mid-September morning, they discovered the mare's foaling had begun earlier than expected. Rain still clung like lace between branches when the horse went down, flank trembling. Joel steadied the halter while Evelyn, sleeves rolled, eased a slick colt into straw. The foal blinked at life, and Evelyn's ribbon braid brushed its damp neck as she cleared its nostrils. She laughed, soft, surprised at herself, when the colt nipped her thumb. Joel felt that laugh settle warm in his ribs long after the stall quieted. Nights lengthened. They laid a second row of stones in the hearth to trap more heat, chinked wall gaps with moss mixing clay, and packed aloft with cedar boughs whose scent wove through sleep. Joel set iron traps around the chicken coop. Once he found a gray fox caught, its eyes resigned. He knelt, spoke low, released the jaws, and watched it limp away. Evelyn watched too, saying nothing, then later pressed her palm to his, approving the mercy. A letter arrived on an October wagon, addressed to Joel, but carrying Evelyn's name. It bore the seal of the Oregon Territorial Court, a decree that debts charged Ezra Finch were annulled, his estate dissolved. Included was a thin slip releasing Evelyn Northwood, wrongfully held. Someone along the line had carried word of Calder Finch's death and the truth that followed. Evelyn read once, folded the paper into quarters, placed it in the cedar chest, then drew Joel outside to bury the rusty shackles, kept until now on the floor for good. They hammered them flat, threw them into the deepest part of the creek, and watched current drag iron the silt. The first snow-dusted branches before the rose could drop its last bloom. Evelyn clipped that bloom, pressed it inside the ledger beside Joel's cedar curl token. He added charcoal to the blank line beneath her proverb. Winter finds us standing. Storms came heavy. Wind slammed ridge peaks, but the cabin stood. They rationed lamp oil, yet never let the flame die. Evelyn read aloud by firelight from one of the peddler's books, her voice still rough-edged yet growing surer. Joel whittled a cradle rail while listening, curls of pine shavings drifting like pale feathers. On the coldest night, the foal pushed its muzzle through the half-door, searching for warmth, and they let it rest just inside the threshold until sunrise set frost sparkling on the pane. One afternoon in late November, boot tracks appeared along the creek, large, unfamiliar. Joel followed them, rifle ready, but found only a weary trapper who had lost his partner to fever. Joel offered stew and bed for the night. Evelyn brewed spruce-tip tonic. In return, the trapper left a bundle of sinew rope and 2 bars of lye soap pressed from elk tallow. After he rode on, Joel marked a fresh entry in the ledger. Simply, none travel alone. Snow deepened, but their stores held. Whenever wind howled against the shutters, Evelyn would touch the porch beam where rings and brooch shimmered, each gleam a lantern of memory. Joel, seeing that, felt every storm outside shrink smaller than the heart's pool of light. December dawned pale blue and brittle. On the morning of the solstice, Evelyn woke Joel before first light. She led him to the garden plot buried beneath drifts and brushed snow back until the rose cane peeked through, black and stark. Around it, the apple sapling stood, leafless but upright. She placed Joel's hand over the frozen cane, then slipped her own atop, and in the mute gray they waited for the faint vibration of life sleeping inside the wood. They could not feel it, but they trusted it was there, just as they once trusted in names spoken and debts burned. Back inside, Joel carved a final line across the mantel. Spring is already inside the root. He handed her the charcoal, and she darkened the last period, sealing its promise. The year closed with quiet rituals. 2 mugs side by side on the stove ledge each dawn, twin pairs of boots thawing by the door each dusk, a cedar curl token hanging now from the colt's tiny halter, and deep in the ledger, pressed rose petals faintly staining the pages with summer's memory. Beyond the cabin windows, pine trunks bent beneath white weight, but did not break. Wind carried the keen cry of a far-off saw biting into timber, a reminder of an old life Joel once called enough. He met Evelyn's eyes across the glow, and in that unhurried exchange they acknowledged the shape of the new life they had built. Word by word, board by board, silence by silence turned to speech. January's snowpack lingered, but daylight crept farther each dawn, prying thin blue wedges between fir trunks. Inside the cabin, warmth never dipped. The stove breathed steady, fueled by logs Joel and Evelyn had cut in autumn while the foal dozed in straw, and the colt's mother stamped approval. They measured winter by small circles. Coffee kettle to mug, mug to lips, lips to smile, shovel to path, path to creek, creek to buckets warming by hearth, ledger to mantle, mantle to window where wind painted and repainted frost. The quiet had changed timbre, no longer a hollow echo, but a hush where two heartbeats met, and decided even silence could sound like music. When February thaw teased a clearing, Evelyn felt the first wave of sickness, light but certain. She rinsed face in snow melt, pressing palms to her belly long after the chill passed. Joel noticed paleness, fetched spruce-tip tea. She took the cup, resting his hand upon her stomach so revelation traveled skin instead of voice. His eyes widened, then closed in reverence neither hymns nor saws had ever drawn from him. They prepared the cradle Joel had fashioned in firelight. Pine slats curved like creek stones, sanded satin smooth. Evelyn lined it with a flour sack blanket and tucked the burlap ribbon along the rim. A reminder that covering can become comfort when choices are turned. The foal nuzzled its velvet nose over the rail. Curious! Late ice storms battered the mountains, driving elk herds low. Joel tracked one wounded by brittle crust. He and Evelyn dried the meat, stewed marrow for strength. Neighbors traversed ridges on snowshoes, trading jars of honey and willow, bark tonic for strips of jerky. In every parting, Joel saw the way Evelyn's hand lingered on each offered package. Touch sealing packed. No one left without promise of return. March, lions roar across tin roof, brought the first sap run. They tapped maples, sap dripping like slow clocks into tin buckets. At dusk Joel boiled it to syrup that smelled with smoke and mornings yet unborn. He poured a thin thread onto Evelyn's wrist. It cooled into amber glass she could taste without words. On equinox eve Evelyn woke with pains sharper than axe blade. Snow still capped shaded hollows, but inside the cabin spring rushed in on ragged breaths. Joel stoked fire, laid clean linens, then rode hard for the circuit preacher's wife. Midwife to half the valley. By lantern light they returned. Snowflakes dizzy in wake of hooves. Labor lasted through night. Joel knelt at hearth, crushing spruce tips for steam while the midwife murmured calm. Evelyn's ribbon slipped loose, blue trailing over shoulder like thawed river. She clenched Joel's fingers until joints ached. He welcomed the pain, anchored to a life forging itself in real time. Just before dawn, a cry pierced rafters. A girl, hair dark as wet cedar bark, lungs certain of her claim. Evelyn whispered one word, mercy, name chosen for how Grace had found them. Joel carried the tiny bundle to window, holding her up to the first pale stripe of sun. Outside, snowmelt drummed downspout. Inside, 3 heartbeats braided. He pressed his brow to the cold glass, promising the view would grow kinder with each season. That afternoon they buried the last cartridge casing. Fired those many nights ago. Beneath the rose cane now budding red points a long thorn. Over it they planted the final apple seed from the packet, a late addition to the future orchard. Evelyn laid Mercy's fist, no bigger than a pine bud, against the soil, letting warmth soak through bark of earth. Joel marked the spot with cedar token carved at birth, a ring of grain meeting itself, endless. April sunlight arrived like brass horns, loud and bright, chasing shadows from under eaves. Barley sprouted, beans twined new strings, and the rose unfolded to a dozen blossoms, ruby against sky. Bees wandered up slope, found nectar, and stayed. Neighbors thronged for sugaring party, tying ribbons, scraps of calico plaid. Even a length of Joel's old shirt, along fence rails, a living ledger of hands who drank from their kettle. Evelyn read the mantle lines aloud for the first time, voice smooth now. $2 owed to silence. Silence pays back in cedar sparks. Blue ties 2 silences into speech. If fear knocks, love answers steady. Name spoken, fire tamed. Roots share water when storms run out. Winter finds a standing. Spring is already inside the root. She added the ninth with a charcoal stub. Mercy blooms where axes once fell. Joel set his palm over hers, blotting fresh dust. Their daughter gurgled in cradle, tiny hand batting the burlap ribbon like a bell rope, each touch ringing a note no one else could hear. Yet everyone felt. Summer followed, obedient to old laws yet shaped by new hearts. The colt grew sure-footed. The rose climbed higher, and every tool on the wall bore 2 sets of wear marks. His broad grip, her slender but unyielding one. Travelers no longer asked for Evelyn by debt-tied name. They asked whether the Carver place had water enough for another night. She always answered yes, even when barrels ran low, because trust refilled them as certainly as rain. On the anniversary of the auction day, Joel rode alone to the basin, cradle board strapped across saddle his pack frame. The market bustled, but no human cargo stood roped. He traded barley sacks for a copper kettle and a child's wool coat. Before leaving, he nailed a small board over the old auction plank, carving 2 words burned dark with his knife tip: N.O. Sales. Below, he etched an open circle touching another, sealing the timber with promise. He returned at twilight. Evelyn waited by the rose, Mercy bundled in quilt. Joel lifted the copper kettle. Its rim flashed flame gold in sunset. Mercy reached tiny fingers toward the light, grabbing emptiness but laughing. Evelyn's laughter joined, low and bright, surprising him again with how far a voice could travel after years of echoing only inside. They stepped inside as chill crept, Joel setting kettle on new hearthstone, Evelyn laying Mercy in cradle whose pine slats glowed honey. Lamp flame fluttered, catching on brooch in 7 rings still guarding the doorway, metals warmed by seasons of breath. Outside, the mountains exhaled shadows into valleys. Inside, the cabin pulsed steady with breath of 3. Joel pulled the ledger from shelf. Blank pages remained, windfall for futures. He inked one final entry on the first of them. Paid in full, paid in names, in cedar, in mercy, all interest compounded by love. He closed book, set quill aside, and banked a fire. Evelyn slipped her hand into his, ribbon trailing between fingers like river path caught in twilight. They stood quiet, hearing only timber creak and cradle soft scrape as Mercy stretched. Outside, axes echoed from distant camps, but here no tree fell tonight. The forest listened, learning a new sound, a home breathing where loneliness had cost only 2 silver coins and been repaid with a lifetime of bloom.